Championship weekend is here in college football, and we're going to preview all 9 games with the latest trends, injury news, odds, and picks with 5 leading college football analysts from around the country. So sit back for the next few hours, soak it all in as OFN College Football Preview on the Ourlads Football Radio Network starts now. All right, thanks for tuning into the Ourlads Football Radio Network as we preview Week 14, also known as Championship Week in college football here on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. And it is a Friday, the very first day of December 2017. I'm your host, Greg DePalma, and we've got a good show for you. So we've got a lot to cover. We're going to start with the Big 12 first in the first hour. Coming up at the bottom of the hour will be Ryan Aber, Oklahoma Sooners beat writer for the Oklahoman. He was with us about a month or so ago, so we're going to get the latest on what's going on for the Sooners port of the Big 12 and get his insight on everything Oklahoma, but that's coming up at the bottom half of the hour. Mike Huguenin will also join us in about an hour. He's been covering college football for nearly 30 years, works for Gridiron now. So we'll talk to Mike at about 5 Eastern. Brian Matthews, sports writer, covers Auburn Tigers football for Rivals, will be with us at 5:30. And Ben Wargel, covering Wisconsin football for Badger247.com, will join us to talk about Wisconsin, Ohio State, Big Ten. And by the way, if you missed it, we already we're joined by Kevin Noon, who was with us yesterday. That's available on demand. Publisher, BuckeyeGrove.com for Rivals. So let's talk TCU football right now, though. Welcome in my first guest. He's a TCU beat writer for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Carlos Mendez. Carlos, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to. Looking forward to it tomorrow.
Yeah, I guess it's a pretty good way to start the Big 12 championship. If you're following college football inside the Big 12, to be a part of it, especially since TCU had, I guess, people thought that they were a pretty good contender this year, but things just weren't really the same for the last year or two. And, for me, it was the defense. For me, it was like, what's going on with Gary Patterson's defense at TCU? He came to the Big 12 with this tremendous defense, and it almost looked to me like he started to get suckered in by the recruiting of the Big 12 and the high-powered offenses. And hey, we got to outscore this team, I guess, in order for us to win the Big 12. So I don't know if that's what happened, and now he's decided to go back the other way. But I don't think it's a coincidence that they're in the Big 12 championship game because they're playing better defense.
Yeah, they are, and the big key is that they're recruiting depth. That was the thing he talked about 6 years ago when they were getting ready to join the league, was you're going to need more players than you have now when you're winning the Mountain West or the Conference USA or WAC or whatever. You need more than just that first team, and that turned out to be correct because, while he had a very good defense in 2014 and a good one in 15, injuries hit in 16, and it showed that they didn't have the numbers of bodies that other teams in the Big 12 did or other teams in other Power 5 conferences did. They got better at that this year. They also recruited bigger defensive linemen. They got younger at that spot, too. That helped. They just got more numbers everywhere. And combined with a dash of experience, fortunately enough for them this year, it's really combined to make them to give them an ideal setup where they've got some experience, but they've also got a lot of bodies they can rotate in, especially on the front seven.
Well, when I take a look around the depth chart for TCU, and I try to take a look at some of the players to keep an eye on defense, potentially for the 2018 NFL Draft. There aren't right now a lot of top-rated players as far as seniors are concerned, at least. So. Tell me, which guys, are the standouts on the younger side? Is that where they're coming from? Who's the leaders of this group on the defensive side?
The two defensive ends are very good players. Ben Banigou, who's a junior transfer out of ULM, and the other defensive end is Matt Beeson. He's a senior, transferred from Boise State a couple of years ago. He started out there. And Beeson, the senior, set a school record last week against Baylor, 5.5 sacks in the game. That puts him up in Jerry Hughes territory on sacks for the season. He's got 11.5 now.
Okay.
So he may have drawn a little bit of attention from, especially any scouts that were there to see Bannock, who's more the physical prototype that you're looking for, more that build with room to grow too. So those two guys have been very good for them this year with the combined sack totals. And of course, you've got the standout linebacker Traven Howard, who's now made more tackles than anybody who's played under Gary Patterson at TCU.
Wow.
And so he's a senior. He's playing very well, and it's a good, experienced linebacker group back there. And they've got a cornerback who's playing well. Another senior named Anthony Tejada doesn't have the size that a lot of cornerbacks do to go against these 6'3" and 6'4" receivers. And that actually kind of showed against Iowa State. But he's a good player. And in fact, he made all conference honors this year. And those 3-4 guys have been a real key.
What about on offense? I know that left tackle Joseph Noteboom is the senior. He's somebody to keep an eye on, as is senior running back Kyle Hicks. Those were the two top-rated players just about a couple of months ago. And what's going on as far as the offense is concerned? Who are the guys outside, of course, Kenny Hill we'll talk about in just a little bit, but who are the guys to keep an eye on offense?
You know, there's a freshman receiver named Jalen Rager who's one of the 4-star guys they've managed to get in the last few years away from Oklahoma. They flipped him. They didn't flip him. They did flip him. He had a commitment to OU, and they grabbed him. He's a 4-star receiver, and he's actually leading them in touchdown catches this year with 6, which, you know, for a true freshman to play for Gary Patterson, period, is something. But he's also being productive. He's a physical guy. He's really fast, really physical, really aggressive to the ball, and he brings a mentality that is rare for a receiver. So he's a guy that you need to watch out for. You know, they lost their best running back, truthfully, Darius Henderson. He's not going to play in this game. He might be back for the bowl game.
Okay.
But, you know, behind him, or rather in his place, Kyle Hicks is getting more action. And this is a senior, 5th-year guy who's very smart, you know, a talented runner. He doesn't have the breakaway elusiveness of Darius Anderson, but he's a really reliable player. And he's got excellent pass catching skills. They use him a lot in the passing game, especially downfield. So when you look at those two guys, they're probably your best threats as far as scoring goes for this offense.
Okay.
They do have a veteran line, and they do have a veteran quarterback in Kenny Hill. But that's where that's where they make their money right there, is with those two guys.
Yeah, Hill's having an efficient year. You know, he's not putting up the crazy type of numbers I guess he would have a few years ago playing in a more high-powered offense, but that's okay because that's pretty much, it's working with TCU. It's working with the system that they're running right now. He's not turning the ball over. His completion percentage is up. Now, I don't know if Kenny Hill is the type of quarterback. In this matchup, you know, Baker Mayfield has obviously got the edge. So what does Kenny Hill need to do in this game? What are the things that say maybe he didn't do or the offense didn't do in the first game against Oklahoma that they're going to have to do this time around?
Well, protect him for one thing. You know, he didn't have much time to throw in that first game against OU. And this is not an offense that really threatens you downfield. They're not going to big play you a lot. They count on driving the ball 9, 10 plays, controlling time of possession, converting third downs. You know, up until the Iowa State game, they were the nation's best on third down. They were up around 65%, which is just phenomenal. And they've slipped back to around 43, 45% now, which is still okay. Most teams will take that.
Sure.
But this was an offense that really made that work for them. That's how they won at Oklahoma State, and that's how they beat West Virginia, was just winning on third down consistently. And Kenny Hill was a big part of that because he was accurate. He had time to throw. He had 3 healthy running backs behind him. But things changed a little bit against Oklahoma because finally that TCU offensive line met a defensive line that was its match, and vice versa. You know, the Oklahoma offensive line really controlled the TCU defensive line. And what really tilted that game in Norman was the performance of the quarterbacks. One was out of this world. One was okay. Kenny Hill did not hurt him that game, but he couldn't make the plays to match Baker Mayfield.
Well, isn't that surprising though? Because that was one of the big questions coming into towards the end of the season with Oklahoma was their defense, and yet it has seemed that the defense has played better since the TCU game. So what happened in the TCU game? Because that had to be kind of surprising. That wasn't anything that had happened most of the year for TCU, was it? Watching the game, were you kind of surprised that TCU's protection broke down?
I was a little bit because, I think part of that was maybe just the atmosphere, the scene out there. You had 88,000 people, and you had Mayfield running around the field before the game, just whipping them into a frenzy. And, maybe it was that TCU just kind of froze in the moment there for a little while. Gary Patterson has talked about that. He said he was surprised that some veteran guys who played very well and in big atmospheres didn't play very well that night. So can you chalk it up to some of that? Maybe. A couple of the players said, not really. They just didn't really have, they said they just weren't on point that night.
Okay.
With the way they played. So, you take that for what it's worth. Oklahoma obviously had the talent advantage, in any setting. But they certainly had momentum behind them all night. And in fact, by halftime, I think both teams just kind of raked in their chips and said, we'll see you in 3 weeks. And here it is now. And I think TCU is just counting on a reset, different field, different atmosphere, different crowd, and see what happens.
Well, how exciting is it for everybody in the Big 12 to finally get this Big 12 championship game? Something that might have hurt the conference's chances for a potential playoff or championship a few years ago.
Yeah, irony of ironies. I mean, here it is again. Oklahoma could be just sitting pretty and waiting for everybody to play out this weekend and feel very good about their CFP chances, just like 2015, the same scenario. They just had to wait out the weekend. Now they've got to go in and beat a team they've already beaten again.
Yeah.
And they also got to convince themselves that it's going to be tough to do that because, they kind of blew through them that first time. So you're almost playing a game against yourself now, which is convincing yourself that this is not going to be easy. Maybe that's one advantage TCU has coming in is that they've got nothing to lose, actually. And if they make this a fourth quarter game, well, you amp up pressure, and
sure.
You know how college football is.
That's right.
So kids, who knows what can happen, a bounce of the ball, a kick of the ball. And, I think that's just the kind of scenario TCU is anticipating. Just be in the game in the fourth quarter and see where you are.
And what about the playoff scenario for TCU? So if TCU, because I know a lot of people are saying, all right, well, Miami wins, then Miami is definitely going to be in the playoffs because you can't penalize Miami for just one loss, and you beat the number one team in the country, and you were just number two a couple weeks ago. So if Miami wins, then they should be in. And we know the SEC champion will be in. And then we were thinking that, of course, if Wisconsin wins, we know they're in. If Ohio State wins, there's the possibility then where you're figuring, okay, well, it's either between Ohio State or Alabama. That's what people are saying. So where does that leave TCU? I'm sure you've probably gone through a whole bunch of different scenarios about what is the best, if you're a TCU fan trying to figure out the best path to getting into the playoffs, what is it?
To be honest with you, I actually didn't spend a lot of time thinking over that, even though at the start of the week, I started kind of looking through the standings and just the outlook, and then I thought to myself,
no.
Well, first get to the game, see where you are at 3 o'clock on Saturday.
Okay.
And then, because we wouldn't even know the results after that. But I think generally speaking, TCU does not need chalk to hold all weekend. They need some unexpected results. And if they can get into a head-to-head comparison contest against, say, Alabama or, say, Ohio State, even Oklahoma, again, they've got a chance as long as they win Saturday morning. What's interesting is that TCU and Oklahoma get to lead off the whole weekend, and that sort of sets things up for every other team watching because a TCU win is going to put a lot of wind in a lot of team sails. But an Oklahoma win, I think, sets up the rest of the weekend to go according to plan for a lot of teams.
Yeah, and I would have to think the Big 12, the commissioner, all the people in the Big 12 are probably going, well, you see, this is why we didn't want a Big 12 championship. Because if TCU wins, they're probably going to knock out Oklahoma and TCU is not going to have a shot, and then there you go. So This is that would be just a really bad scenario if that happens for not getting to the playoffs. Of course, I'm sure TCU fans want to win the game, but they also want to go to the playoffs if they win the game.
Yeah, you'd rather win the game because that's when the best things can happen for you. There's no doubt about it. But, a New Year's Six Bowl, a Big 12 championship, 1 year after being 6 and 7.
That's true.
No one's going to throw that back.
Nope.
So you feel bad for the conference. Maybe if you're TCU, it is your conference after all. But, there's no such thing as letting a team win.
No.
And, if Oklahoma wins, beats you fair and square, fine. Let them have all the success they can find. But, for TCU, you've just got to try to win the game. And Gary Patterson has said, even this week, that he doesn't really believe there's a shot for TCU, but, it's still up to him to win the game.
Yeah. What is the path as far as the bowl situation for TCU? Win or lose? Is it completely different if they win or lose the game?
It's not that much different, but they have a much, much better chance of going to a New Year's Six game if they win. We'll start with if they lose. If they lose, they're going to go to no worse than the Alamo Bowl. That's normally the Big 12's second place bowl.
Okay.
So they'll have that. They've got that in the bag at worst.
Who do they play?
They would play somebody like Stanford, Washington State.
Okay.
Second or third team out of the Pac-12.
Not bad.
Wouldn't be a bad game at all.
No.
And it's usually a fun game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they win, you would normally be looking at the Sugar Bowl, but the problem is that this year the Sugar Bowl is part of the CFP. The Big 12 champ gets the Sugar Bowl, except this year, of course, it's part of the rotation, so Oklahoma would have it. So that leaves TCU with a potential invitation with a win to an at-large spot in the Fiesta, Cotton, or Peach.
Oh, okay.
And most likely it would be the Cotton because they've got two at-large spots, and it'd be a team close to home. Maybe you could get Penn State out there. Maybe you could get even an Alabama. Wouldn't that be a great scene for TCU to play a team like that right there in their backyard?
Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime you can get Alabama on your schedule, especially in a bowl game atmosphere, that would be huge, and for recruiting too. Let's talk about the rest of the conference. This time of year is a whole lot going on. So let's. I guess I want to. I'd spoken. I forget when it was. It was probably several weeks back. We were talking Iowa State football here on the program, and I one of the things that I've really wondered about over the years with this Iowa State program has been what could they be in a situation where if they found the right coach based on their basketball success, could this become a winning program, a winning football program? And so I was wondering, I actually put the idea to my guest at the time, and that was Tommy Birch from the Des Moines Register. Des Moines Register covers Iowa State, and he wasn't really sure whether or not they could lock Matt Campbell up. Thought that was a possibility, but now it's become true that they've been able to lock him up. He's going to be there for a while. How big is that for Iowa State football, and how important is that also for the Big 12?
It's huge. It's huge for both because Iowa State now can start to build a reputation of being able to keep a coach. That's the problem with a lot of schools that just haven't won is that they get a nice hot young mind in there who does something and then he's snatched up by a bigger school who needs a coach. And certainly that was the scenario that Iowa State was looking at. So, kudos to them for being proactive enough to step up, and credit to Matt Campbell for, if he realized that's what he wants, for actually grabbing it and making sure that's what he gets. And the Big 12 is going to benefit also because, not every team can win every year, but if you have the handful of teams that do win every year have a down year, you need somebody else to take their place every season. And if Iowa State can step up every 3, 4, 5, 6 years, whatever, you've got a better chance for a healthier conference.
Yeah, because you were, of course, CCU is a part of the big win for the program for Iowa State. That was some scene after the game, and who knows? Maybe that was the exact time that the AD at Iowa State started thinking about that contract extension, and because that and you've seen Iowa State play. And they, all year long, just about every game they have played, they have been in the games, whether they win or lose. They play hard, and you could just tell that they're very well coached, that they have the right coach. And now that he's locked in there, maybe he's got an opportunity to recruit, and who knows? Maybe something special could happen, as we're seeing something special happening in basketball with the TCU team, thanks to Dixon.
Hey, coaching makes a difference in college sports. It's everything. You need players, obviously, but players don't come to you without a coach who can recruit them. And if you've got somebody who can both recruit and coach the game, that's when you get something that rises above everybody else.
Bill Snyder, what's going on at Kansas State? I mean, I keep hearing all sorts of weird stuff going on over there with who's taking over for him when he leaves. Is it all about him wanting his son to take over? Is that pretty black and white?
Yeah, I think so, because he told the Wichita Eagle, I guess it was last summer, that Sean really does most of the work, the preparation, the administrative details. He's sort of the head coach behind the scenes.
Okay.
Of course, with Bill Snyder's approval on everything. Bill Snyder is certainly contributing as far as game plans go and talking to players and recruiting, but he believes that his son Sean is more than capable of running the show now, because he's been doing it for a number of years now.
And what do you think? Do you think that's going to overall be what we'll wind up seeing? I mean, it's kind of hard for me to believe that Bill Snyder's not going to get what he wants.
I feel the same way. Bill Snyder needed a good season. He needed a winning season. He got that.
Yep.
But as you approach the final years of his coaching career, he needs to sort of reinforce that and really beef up that reputation at Kansas State, where his word should get the maximum respect, if that's what he wants to have happen.
Do you think everything is going to be okay in Baylor? I mean, there's no reason for me to think that just from what I saw this year that it won't be. They had it was just a very terrible situation to walk into for Matt Rule. I don't know if we all expected it to be this bad, to tell you the truth. But then again, under the circumstances, why not? So, but no reason to think that anything's wrong, right?
No, I think Baylor is close to having its house in order. The Matt Rule hiring, I thought, said a lot, because this was a guy from the outside with a good reputation, and somebody who, I'm sure they did not sugarcoat the situation to him. And if he accepted it, then that showed his trust in them, and hopefully that trust was reciprocated. But as far as the personnel and what they've got on the field, you knew that with as many guys as they lost, and as slow as the recruiting went for them, at one time they only had one commitment.
Wow.
That it was going to take some time to get that talent back in there. There's still some of the Briles receiver and skill position speed left, a lot of it, in fact. But they didn't have a quarterback. They brought in the transfer from Arizona, but they only had him 2 games before the concussion kind of ended things for him. So they've tried 2 freshmen at quarterback. One of them is pretty good. The Charlie Brewer kid won a state title here in Texas.
Okay.
In the largest division at Lake Travis, which is Baker Mayfield's school. This is a football powerhouse. So they've got something at quarterback with him. Problem is they didn't have a line to protect him. And so many of the guys that Matt Rule eventually signed on because they knew they were going to play as freshmen. Well, that's great, but you're still a freshman playing in the Big 12, and it's caught up to them. And that's why they went 1-10. Frankly, I didn't think they would lose those early non-conference games.
Yeah, those were the ones that got you a little nervous.
Yeah, that was a big surprise when you lose to Liberty and UTSA. That's a terrible thing. But That's, with apologies to Liberty and UTSA, but that's what really set him back. And so he's got a lot of work to do, but I think he's going to get a chance.
Yeah, he also, of course, Platt, their leading receiver, went down early in the season, and Lovett, the true freshman, is having a good season. So, yeah, they should be fine. By the way, is everything, all the other coaching situations okay? I mean, Dave Beatty's coming back. Did I miss anything? Is everybody else, all the other jobs secure?
Yeah, looks like Cliffy earned himself another year with that win at Texas there last week.
Okay.
Beatty's having a hard time, and I don't know why. I'm not there on the ground. I just don't know. He's a well-respected coach. He's got a lot of connections to the Texas high schools, and that's got to help you. But there's something else that's a problem out there that he hasn't gotten fixed yet.
Yeah.
You look around the rest of the league. West Virginia is fine, I think, right now with Dana Holgerson. He's got a plan. The only thing is they just don't recruit Texas very well or very much. They need players like everybody else, and they do pop up players here and there. They've got a safety in the league who's a very nice player right now. Who else is out there? Texas is.
Yeah, Texas.
They're
is
on
good.
the Tom Herman road for a while. They're not going to leave that for a while. And let's see.
I think Gundy's going to be back.
Gundy's fine.
Yep.
Yeah. Iowa State's doing fine. We talked about them. So
that's it. Everything else
as a
is
whole,
good.
the Big 12 is doing as fine as any other league would be.
Carlos, I appreciate your time. Good luck with the game tomorrow, and we'll definitely look forward to maybe speaking with you again prior to the bowl game.
Hey, you bet. I'd love that.
I appreciate it, Carlos. Good luck tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, you got it. That's Carlos Mendez, TCU beat writer for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, as TCU will take on Oklahoma. And yeah, by the way, I didn't have time to talk about the basketball program, but Carlos covers athletics for TCU, not just football. And the basketball program is this isn't a place. I mean, this is the Ourlads Football Network. But I do talk basketball at Prime Sports Network. And I'm a big college basketball fan, just like I'm a big college football fan. But I guess another day. And who knows, maybe another network. But anyway, that's the first part of the Big 12, TCU. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of think Patterson has done just a really good job this year because, we talk about the draft an awful lot on this network for a reason. And there's just not a lot of big-time players right now for TCU, and I don't know. Now, look, that doesn't mean they can't beat Oklahoma. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to really take a lot. I've said before, I don't know whether or not I trust Kenny Hill in a big spot. He's going to go up against Baker Mayfield. Mayfield, if he doesn't have a poor game, if he isn't disappointing, then that means Kenny Hill is going to have to play one of the best games of his career in the last game of his career. I don't know if he could do that. I don't look around and see that he has all sorts of weapons either. As Carlos said, he does lose, a real good, exciting young back in Anderson, so that's not going to help. So, I think Patterson's done a good job. What I really like about it, though, is the defense. As I said at the open, go back to recruit. Who cares about the offensive skill position players? I don't. Not if I'm running TCU, because you're in Texas. If you do a nice job of recruiting under the radar kids, you don't have to recruit the blue chip guys. Your blue chip guys at TCU that Gary Patterson should be recruiting should be on the defensive side of the ball. Go back to doing what you guys did best before you came to the Big 12, and then even in 2014. I mean, when TCU, I just remember when TCU was relevant as far as a national, look, it's a good year for TCU. I mean, look, they're in the top 10, but I'm talking about real relevant. I'm talking about like they were in 2014, fighting for a national, real close, maybe even should have been there. It was defense. And before the Big 12, as I said before, they were a great defensive program, and that's where Gary Patterson comes from. That's where his specialty is, and I think if TCU is going to get back to that, and I know it's not easy in the Big 12, I get it, but I think it can be done. I really do. Just take a look at Washington State's playing better defense. In the Pac-12, a lot of people, Pac-12, they don't play defense either. But you know what? Justin Wilcox is now the head coach at Cal. They're going to start playing better defense soon. Washington State's playing better defense. Yes, it can be done. And I think TCU is a better program for it. But I just don't think that they can get it done, like I said, unless Baker Mayfield has an off day, which I don't anticipate is going to happen. But let's find out more about the Oklahoma side of things by welcoming in our special guest. We talked to him a few weeks ago, beat writer for the Oklahoma Sooners, for the Oklahoman at newsok.com, Ryan Aber. Ryan, thanks for taking the time to talk to us again today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Ryan. So we last spoke several weeks ago, just before the Oklahoma State game, and boy, did that turn out to be a fun game. And then after that, they had the really big game with TCU, and Oklahoma was able to survive that. And we talked about how dangerous that was going to be to have that big matchup with Oklahoma State. Usually that's at the end of the year. They switched it to earlier in the season. So kind of an unknown experience to have to play that rivalry and then have to play TCU of all teams. But Oklahoma came up big and strong against their opponent on Saturday. And now they're going to have to face them again. So how confident is this group that they're going to be able to get it done?
Well, this is a pretty confident team, and all you've got to look at is what the production that they're putting together offensively this year. I think that their offensive efficiency is something in the neighborhood of 57% as far as scoring touchdowns on drives, which is just incredible. It's even better than their offense was last year. Baker Mayfield, who you mentioned, has just been absolutely phenomenal this year, shattering his FBS record for passing efficiency. They've been able to run the ball a whole lot better over the last month or two. And their defense, while not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, has shown some improvement over the last few weeks. So they feel pretty good here entering this Big 12 championship game.
Yeah, I was talking to Carlos Mendez about how of all years everybody's dying for the Big 12 to have a championship game. And people, there were some people on the side of, well, you never know. Be careful what you wish for. Maybe that's not exactly good for the conference. Oh, come on. No, it's always good to have that game and it'll help you out at the end. It hurt us a couple of years ago. And now here you got the worst case scenario, don't you? Because if TCU beats Oklahoma, then chances are no Big 12 teams in the playoffs. Whereas if there was no Big 12 championship this year, then Oklahoma would probably be in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no doubt that Oklahoma would be going to the playoffs regardless if they didn't have the Big 12 championship game. It's not the one they need for that 13th data point, which got brought up so much as they're talking about adding this game. I think the league would have been much better served had, say, TCU beat Iowa State, and this was another quarterfinal, much like the ACC and SEC games are this weekend, where the winner of those games is going to make the playoffs. But let's also remember that this wasn't just about the Big 12 being competitive and getting into the college football playoff. It's also about remaining financially competitive with especially the Big Ten and the SEC. And this doesn't I think it's approximately $30 million that this game brings in. It's not going to get the Big 12 on par quite with those two conferences, but it bridges the gap a whole lot more than where they stood before this game got added.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Now, what about Baker Mayfield? Because I've said now for probably 6-7 weeks now, and I think we talked about this, and every chance I get on some of these shows, some of these NFL shows, and especially my weekly Jet show, I just keep talking about Baker Mayfield. Oh, I want Baker Mayfield on the Jets. I'm so glad that everybody keeps overlooking Baker Mayfield, because then it means the Jets can sit right where they are. They don't have to trade up to get a quarterback, and Baker Mayfield will be right there waiting for him on the draft board. So what do you think? And I even said, you know what? I'm glad he grabbed his crotch a couple weeks ago, because that just lowers his stock some more. So that's how high I am on Baker Mayfield. And I understand he's got the height limitations, and there are a lot of things that people are wondering about with the, with the whole offensive scheme and all that. And there are some concerns. I completely get that. But you tell me, you've seen this kid grow up. Should I be excited about Baker Mayfield as a pro quarterback?
Well, I think if there's one thing that people have not had success with over the last really 6-7 years, it's betting against Baker Mayfield.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at every turn, this guy outperforms what people think he's going to do. when you go back to his junior year in high school, when he lost out the starting quarterback job, wound up having to replace a guy who got hurt early in the season and led that team to a 14-0 state championship season in Texas's largest classification, to what he did at Texas Tech, to what he did at Oklahoma. And I think it's been a steady progression for him. A couple years ago, I would have said this guy's a really good college quarterback, but I'm not sure he had what it took to make the NFL, or make a lasting impact in the NFL. But he's become so much better of a decision maker, and he's still a bit of that gunslinger. He's got a Brett Favre in him, but generally when he tries to thread needles, he's threading them in ways that only his guys can catch it. Only 5 interceptions this year, which is an incredible number given how many times he throws the ball.
Yep.
And also his arm strength has gotten so much better over the last couple of seasons. And his ability to lay the ball out with really, really pinpoint accuracy to guys like D.D. Westbrook and Marquise Brown over the last couple of years, I think has made me shift my tone a little bit toward this guy, if he finds the right system, can last quite a while in the NFL. And we've seen, shorter quarterbacks be able to do it in recent years. I always bring up the Drew Brees comparison.
Yes.
When you talk about Baker Mayfield. I think he's that kind of player.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll find out, and there's a long way to go to talk about that. It looks like he's going to be the Heisman winner. That looks like it's been locked up for a while now. No reason to think he's not winning the Heisman, right?
No, absolutely not. I think maybe, what happened a couple weeks ago against Kansas takes him a little bit out of that the Troy Smith level blowout that I think a lot of us expected. And I still think he's going to win very comfortably. But who knows how many votes that's going to cost him. It's going to cost him a few. I don't think it's going to cost him very many and near enough to make this thing a tight race. For one thing, who else are you going to vote for, really?
That's true.
At this point. I mean, Baker Mayfield has been consistent all year. The other guys have fallen off. I think, maybe had Khalil Tate started earlier, or, Kerryon Johnson not missed those games early. Maybe it's a different story. But right now, this is Baker Mayfield's thing, and I think you can pretty well pencil him in for a statue right outside of Owen Field in Norman for the next Heisman Trophy winner.
All right. Now, what's the big – so is that really also, when you take a look at the players around him, the team around him, what's the biggest difference from the playoff team a couple years ago besides Mayfield himself? What is it that he has around him that's better than that team?
Well, I think the big thing is that the depth at receiver. Playoff team had Sterling Shepard, who was just a fantastic college wide receiver, and D.D. Westbrook, who was a pretty good complementary piece, but he really took a massive step forward between his junior and senior year to last year winning the Biletnikoff. This year, he doesn't have that one guy to lean on, but he can spread the field around so much with, I mentioned Marquise Brown. He's also got CeeDee Lamb, who's a deep threat. Mark Andrews, the tight end, who very rarely plays tight end, but creates a lot of matchup problems. And then Dimitri Flowers, who is a little bit of a safety valve as well. I think the combination of that with their offensive line, which is so much better than that team 2 years ago, that a couple of these pieces we're starting on, but we're very raw. The Orlando Brown, Bobby Evans, their tackles have just been fantastic. They released the all-conference team yesterday, and actually 4 out of their 5 offensive linemen were either on the first team or the second team as voted by the coaches. And the guy who was left off of those two was Bobby Evans, their right tackle, who, talking to people around the league, they think that he's the best, the second best NFL talent in this league at tackle among the players who played much this year. I know Connor Williams at Texas is the guy who's right there behind Orlando Brown. But that offensive line, the way they're able to protect Baker Mayfield, and the way that Baker Mayfield is able to pick out so many different targets in the passing game, makes this a little bit different team than that one in 2015 that lost to Clemson in the first round of the college football playoff.
Yeah, if you take a look at the most recent big games for Oklahoma, the Oklahoma State game, that's the game that Brown just went absolutely crazy with over 200 yards receiving. And then the TCU game, where Rodney Anderson had a huge game. He had 151 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, 139 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. So, and we had actually talked about Anderson when we spoke before the Oklahoma State game. And boy, watching him just grow, because that you figured was going to be a big difference between last year and this year, was going to be, wow, you lose Mixon, you lose Pirine, what are you going to do? And all of a sudden, Rodney Anderson, just week in and week out as the season has progressed, has really just opened your eyes with the game. I mean, I've seen some of the runs that he's made. It's just been incredible. He looks like he's going to be a fantastic player to keep an eye on in the next year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be, we're talking about the NFL draft. It'll be interesting to see what he does, because let's remember he's a sophomore, but he's draft eligible because he missed really the last 2 seasons with injuries.
Okay.
So he might be a guy who decides, hey, I've had all these injuries, although they've been sort of fluke deals both times.
Okay.
Maybe it's time to test the waters. But Rodney Anderson is a guy that Baker Mayfield and Lincoln Riley and everybody else on the offensive side for the Sooners just raved about in the offseason. But at the first of the season, we just didn't see it. He was all the way down to 4th on their depth chart, wasn't getting used much. But as he got more and more acclimated to the game, as he comes back from that neck injury and gets used to taking contact again, he's become a guy. He's not as good as Samaje Perine or Joe Mixon individually, but he has the traits that made both of those guys so good. He's got a little bit of the power that Samaje Perine brought to the Sooners and is bringing to the Washington Redskins this year. And then he's got the speed and the pass catching ability, especially, is what we saw against TCU. I mean, this wasn't just find Anderson a little bit of open space where he can just turn and catch it. These were, wide receiver going up and making contested catches from Baker Mayfield, and really, I think, opened a lot of eyes, both in Norman and nationally, about what Rodney Anderson could be as a player.
And, of course, we know how good Mark Andrews is. You think this is it for Mark Andrews? You think he's coming out?
I honestly would be really surprised if Mark Andrews comes back to school next year. He's just been such a weapon. There's a good chance he wins the Mackey Award as the top tight end in the country. He can line up both tight and wide, does that quite a bit for the Sooners, lining up both in the slot and even on the outside, and creates so many matchup problems. I just don't know how much more he can grow in Norman, and he's probably going to be gone after this year, as well as is Orlando Brown, who I mentioned,
yep,
who sort of danced around the issue a couple weeks ago. But I don't think there's anybody that believes that he's hanging around this year.
Yeah, and by the way, Brown is the top-rated offensive tackle, underclass offensive tackle at Ourlads. So that shows you right there that we know how good he is. And Mark Andrews, of course, is also very highly rated as the number 1 underclass tight end at Ourlads. So those are a couple of guys that you would more than likely expect with those ratings that they're going to leave. How about defensively? A couple of years ago, you had some pretty good defenders like Eric Stryker, Charles Tapper, Charles Walker. This year, though, it seems to be primarily one really talented guy that wreaks havoc in Okoronko. So talk about how good he is compared to like a Stryker or any of those top guys from the 2015 team.
Well, I think he's a little bit more complete player than Eric Stryker. Stryker was that edge rusher who that's pretty well what he was designed to play. Okoronkwo can drop back and play in a true linebacker spot, although this year it's primarily been used as a defensive end and just sort of pinning his ears back and going after quarterbacks. And it's been really effective for the Sooners. And I think, their defense has struggled quite a bit, especially on the back end with their issues at cornerback as the year's gone on. Sort of the same thing that played their defense a year ago. But having Okoronkwo be disruptive has really helped them cover some of those things up. And they've gotten better at finding other ways to get pressure on quarterbacks, especially as DJ Ward and Amani Bledsoe and Devonta Lampkin, their defensive linemen, have progressed as the year's gone on. But Okoronkwo is just a fantastic player. This isn't a great defense overall, but Ogbo Okoronkwo is quite possibly the best defender in this league overall.
Yeah, and based on how, look, they've got the best quarterback in college football, and they've got the weapons like an Anderson running the ball and an Andrews at tight end and a tackle and a tackle tandem. So they've got an offense that is as maybe the best offense in college football. Just like in the NFL, sometimes you don't need to have the best defense as well, as long as you have a defense that can make some stops every once in a while and not get run over. And I think that's what we saw against TCU because, we were all wondering after the Oklahoma State game, is Oklahoma going to be can they survive winning this way? And chances were no. You're not going to be able to beat all the best teams when 60-50. That's just not going to happen. And all of a sudden, the TCU game, what happened?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you look Big 12. It's not this nobody's been in this league or it's just offensive league sort of puts up video game numbers.
Yeah.
But really, when you look at the league, if you take out what Oklahoma and Oklahoma State were able to do offensively, and those two offenses were just otherworldly this year, and then you take out what the teams get playing against Kansas, because Kansas was just absolutely horrendous this year, and everybody scored 60 on them.
Sure.
Really, this league was pretty average when you look at all the other games. So, yes, Oklahoma's defense isn't going to be able to stop Oklahoma State's defense. Slow down most offenses enough to make up with it with their great offense. And I'm not sure when you look at, the potential for, certainly when you go Saturday against TCU, they're not a team that's really going to stretch the field on you a whole lot. Potentially the teams really outside of Auburn, because Auburn, I think, is a bad matchup for OU when you look at the playoff if they're able to make it that way, just because Auburn has a Big 12 quarterback. Jarrett Stidham played at Baylor and has that arm and fit in perfectly in this league. And they've got the SEC defense, which, can always be a problem. But this is one of those things, you hear defense wins championships. Well, this offense, I think, is good enough to make it to where they can win a championship with a less than stellar defense if they can get a couple stops, force a turnover here and there, and give it back to their offense just a little bit.
Yeah, and you have to have, of course, that special quarterback as well, and that's what they have. It's one thing to have an offense that could score a whole ton of points in college football nowadays, which a lot of teams can. It's another thing to have a difference maker, a quarterback, somebody that you really just feel that can win the game for you no matter what the circumstances. And that's what Oklahoma has, and that's why they have a shot. What happened in the TCU game? Were you surprised as how Oklahoma was able to play? It seemed like they played one of their better defensive games of the year, considering the circumstance.
A little bit. Kenny Hill still had some success. I think he threw for 270 yards in that game. They were also able to run the ball pretty effectively in that game. But OU was able to force a couple of those turnovers. They were able to, get a couple stops and get off the field. And really, after that first drive where TCU comes down and scores a touchdown, takes a 7-3 lead early, Oklahoma just rolled in the first half. It was, I believe, what was the score, 38-10 at halftime, and then just sort of put it on cruise control after that. But that was very impressive for them, really on both sides of the ball, to be able to do that offensively or defensively, especially with three starting freshmen in their secondary that they used in that game, and then all making their first career starts, and then to be able to move the ball on offense in the first half against the league's by far best defense was pretty incredible in that one.
How is the health of Oklahoma coming into this game?
They're in pretty good shape. They get back Khalil Houghton, their safety, who started 4 games this year and is going to help them with some depth back there. I don't know exactly how much he'll play, but having him back really helps them. They got Jordan Thomas back last week, which really helps their depth back there. I don't know that he's going to start, mainly because Trey Norwood, the young freshman, has just been pretty solid back there, and Jordan Thomas had struggled before that. But they're in as good a shape health-wise as they've been all season leading into this thing, which they've lost a couple offensive linemen before the season. They've been able to hang on to that depth without any major injuries up there. They were able to escape with Drew Samia being able to play this week after his ejection a week ago in the first half against West Virginia. So they're in pretty good shape right now, but they certainly need to stay that way here to win this game and two to have a good chance in the college football playoff.
What do you think about the playoffs situation? What's the scenario if Oklahoma wins? Well, let's talk about potential matchups. You said Auburn's a team that you definitely think is not the matchup Oklahoma wants. What about some of the other opponents? If you had to say just guessing on what you're going to see here, especially if Clemson wins, if Clemson wins and Auburn wins and Oklahoma wins, then I guess the chances are pretty legit that we're going to see Oklahoma-Auburn, right?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that Oklahoma-Auburn winds up being the matchup, likely in the Rose Bowl. I'm interested to see how the committee, if all of that stuff happens and the favorites win those three matchups and Wisconsin wins the Big Ten, I think there's a chance that the committee could bump Wisconsin up as high as number one. I mean, we've seen what kind of bump that Big Ten championship game has given teams in the past. That Ohio State team a few years ago that leapfrogged TCU and Baylor. So I think that'll be interesting to watch for me. But if I'm Oklahoma, I don't want to face Auburn. Outside of that, probably Clemson would be the next team that I wouldn't want to face. But for the Sooners, I think they'd have to feel really good going against the Wisconsin team that you don't feel like can take advantage of the deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball. Yes, Wisconsin's a really good defense, but Baker Mayfield and that OU offense is something that the Badgers haven't seen anything close to this year, and really probably the same thing for some of those other teams that are in the mix. So it'll be interesting to see what shakes out here tonight with the Pac-12 championship game and Saturday with the other championship game, and then what the committee feels like on Sunday and where they get sent.
All right, and by the way, Lincoln Riley, under the circumstances, he's one win away from a playoff appearance in his very first season. I didn't think there was any doubt that Lincoln Riley was going to be a successful coach after looking at what he did at East Carolina. Happening this soon? Well, sometimes it happens. And he definitely got lucky to have this team set up with Baker Mayfield as a senior in his first year. So how are the results, the early results, the first season results of what Lincoln Riley's done?
Well, it's hard not to just call him a fantastic runaway success. Given one, the smooth transition of power between Bob Stoops and Lincoln Riley and how well that went over the summer when Bob Stoops decided to step down. And two, just looking at the national landscape right now. I mean, can you imagine having Lincoln Riley as your offensive coordinator with all these openings that are going on right now, and how coveted he would be? I mean, you think Tennessee might want Lincoln Riley as their head coach? You
Sure.
think, Oregon if Billy Taggart leaves, or Arkansas for sure would want Lincoln Riley. So Oklahoma not only put Lincoln Riley in a really good position, they put themselves in a really good position to be set for quite a few years in the future with that transition of power to Lincoln Riley over the offseason.
And they're going to have a different type of offense next year, or at least a different type of quarterback, because this Kyler Murray, I remember seeing him for A&M. And of course, he's looking pretty good so far in his limited duties for Oklahoma. So look, he's not Baker Mayfield, probably not an NFL quarterback, but that's just fine as far as the way Oklahoma wants to run their offense. They're just going to run it a little differently, but no reason to think that they're not going to have some success under Murray as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Kyler Murray had to start that game last week against West Virginia, and the first play he breaks off a 66-yard run, I think it was, set them up for a touchdown and play later. And then all of a sudden, Baker Mayfield only has to miss 2 plays. And Kyler Murray is the most decorated quarterback in Texas high school history, which is pretty incredible given all the over the years. And it is going to be different. Their skill sets are a little bit different. I think Murray is going to be asked to run the ball a little bit more than what Baker Mayfield has done the last couple of years. but he's going to still have all those really good pieces in front of him. Their wide receiver core comes back mostly intact, depending on Rodney Anderson's decision. The running back core could come back intact as well. Not going to be quite as good up front for them, but you've got to imagine that this offense is still going to be able to move the ball pretty effectively with Kyler Murray under center.
All right, Ryan. So I appreciate you taking the time once again to talk to us, and good luck with the game tomorrow. And hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up with you again before the bowl game, or of course, hopefully after a win, the playoffs.
Sounds great. Anytime. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, that's Ryan Aber, Oklahoma football beat writer for the Oklahoman at newsok.com. As we get our Big 12 part of the show this week. And hopefully you got all the information you need to get ready for that Big 12 championship game, which is 12. Now, keep in mind, it's 12:30 tomorrow, so it's an early game. You got the Pac-12 game tonight at 8, and then tomorrow you got a whole bunch of early games as far as the championship games. So there is that, and that's unfortunate. I mean, I'm not a big fan of that, but it is what it is. You got to deal with the early games, but still, it's you got to DVR like I do, and you're gonna have fun, and I will. Conference USA at 12, MAC at 12, and AAC also at 12. So 3 other conference championship games are going to be taking place at the same time as the Big 12 championship game, which actually gets underway half hour after those 12 o'clock games. And we've been able to preview all these games, by the way. We've had some really great interviews this week to prepare you for these games. So just go to Ourlads.com and check out the on-demand section of the Ourlads.com, Ourlads Radio Football Network webpage, and you'll see all the interviews on demand from earlier this week, including earlier today when we talked ACC football. And, of course, that game is going to be one of the games on Saturday night. You got 3 games on Saturday night. Don't forget, you also have the Mountain West Conference Championship game. Everybody's going to be looking at that Big Ten and ACC Championship game for good reason. But there's also going to be that Mountain West Conference Championship game going on at 7:45. So that'll kick off just before the other 2 games. Rematch of last week's game between Fresno State and Boise State. Actually, this is a rematch of the 2014 Mountain West Conference Championship game, won by Boise State 28-14. So that's the only thing. That's the only thing that I'm a little bit disappointed about is the scheduling this year. I don't really understand why. I'm the MAC used to have these games at night. I'm pretty sure it used to be they used to be like maybe 7 o'clock on Friday night, and then after that you would get like the Pac-12 game. Why the MAC turned into a 12 o'clock Saturday game to go along with 3 other championship games, I'm not quite sure. But okay, it is what it is. And like I said, if you've got a DVR like I do, then not the biggest deal in the world. Okay, now coming up at the bottom half of the hour, we're going to talk with Brian Matthews, Auburn Tigers writer for Rivals. And, of course, we had on Anthony Dasher talking Georgia football yesterday, so that's available on demand. Ben Wargel will join us in an hour. He'll be our last guest, and he covers Wisconsin Badger football for Badger247.com. So, and we also, of course, had on Kevin Noon for Ohio State yesterday, covering Ohio State football. So that's available on demand. So we've got the SEC covered, and of course the Big Ten covered. Now we got the Big 12 covered. ACC was covered earlier today. But there's a whole lot else going on as far as some of the other games. And that's why we wanted to sandwich in between these interviews an opportunity to talk to a national writer so we can get his take on everything else going on. And I can throw in my 2 cents on all these games as well. So let's introduce to the program Mike Huguenin. He's been covering college football for nearly 30 years. He's with Gridiron now. Mike, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right, Mike. So tell me, about 30 years. That's a long time. You're with Gridiron now, right now. Tell me a little bit about the background and, of course, your relationship with Gridiron now.
Yeah, we've been around this is our 3rd season. I've been covering college football heavy duty for about 20 years, Sporting News, the Orlando Sentinel, Yahoo Sports. This has been a interesting week. There's a lot, obviously, 9 conference title games, but I would argue that the coaching carousel in some respects has overshadowed the conference title games, and obviously schools in a frenzy to get coaches in place before the early signing period.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of an unintended consequence of the early signing period. You want a coach in place 2 or 3 weeks before these guys sign. And some of the stuff that's gone on I'm not even sure there's a phrase, for instance, to describe what's going on in Tennessee. But you had Jimbo Fisher leave today before FSU's final game. It's just been a wild and woolly week for the coaching carousel.
Yeah, I just saw that just before I went on the air. So we were kind of thinking that might happen, and it has. So I guess Texas A&M is happy. Where does this leave Florida State?
I think their number one target is Willie Taggart.
Okay.
Oregon coach. He's been there for basically about a year, not quite a year. He's a Florida native, coached at USF, coached at Western Kentucky, former Jim Harbaugh assistant at Stanford. Played for Jim's dad, Jack, at Western Kentucky. They won a Division I AA title with Taggart at quarterback. A really good recruiter. And the potential for a monster recruiting staff at Florida State exists. 2 of his assistants at Oregon, Mario Cristobal and Jim Levitt. If those guys come with him to Florida State, that would be the best recruiting staff in the state. Taggart's a young guy, though, 41. I think there are some concerns about how well-rounded he is as a coach overall, but certainly he's an interesting recruiter.
Oh, yeah.
And again, I think he is the leading candidate at FSU.
And as we know in college sports, recruiting is probably more than half the battle in trying to win football games. You can leave those late game decisions. I mean, even Nick Saban, sometimes you can question some of his late game decisions because he's hardly ever in them. So you just recruit well, and you're going to win a lot of games easy, and you won't have to be second-guessed like you are second-guessed left and right usually every week in the NFL because those games are close all the time. So recruiting is really what it's all about, and if Taggart could do a great job of recruiting, which I'm sure he could, we can understand why they want him over there. So what happens to Oregon?
That's a good question. I don't think they thought they'd be in this position a year later. Again, Taggart's a young guy, sort of. I think they thought he could grow on the job. It's got an interesting first year. They're 7-5, but they were 6-1 with their starting quarterback, Justin Herbert. When he got hurt, they sort of went south quickly. That's going to be, Oregon obviously is a much better job than it was 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But I would argue it's not as good a job as it was when Chip Kelly left. So they struggled the last 2 years of the Mark Helfrich regime. And again, they're 7-5 team this year with Taggart. They have money to spend. They have the Nike background. But again, I don't know where their first choice would be if Taggart leaves.
Do you think, is Oregon the type of school that's going to worry about a big name kind of coach? Or do you think, they did hire Taggart, and Taggart didn't necessarily, of course, he didn't come from a big program. So could we see maybe somebody from a similar type of conference, somebody that doesn't necessarily have a blue chip name, and because there's a lot of hot guys out there, a lot of hot assistant candidates as well, and like you said, I think it's a really good job though. I mean, if you're a really smart coach, I think Kelly showed everybody that you can have a good time there. That's a pretty nice place to play.
Yeah, and Taggart came from a group of thought school. The previous 3 head coaches were all promoted from within. Bellotti, Chip Kelly, Mark Helfrich. And Taggart, I think, was seen as a gamble because, hey, you're bringing a guy across the country. Again, he had coached at Western Kentucky, USF, but he did have, I believe it was 3 seasons as a Stanford assistant, so he was somewhat used to the Pac-12. But yeah, Oregon is a school that Tennessee seems obsessed with, for instance, with bringing in a big name guy. I don't think Oregon would be. I think Oregon is comfortable with bringing in a group of 5 guy or maybe even a quote unquote hot assistant. I don't think Oregon's married to the idea, oh my God, Taggart's leaving after a year. This proves we should have gone for a big name guy. I think it's frankly the opposite. I think Oregon will be quite comfortable hiring an assistant or a group of 5 guy with West Coast experience.
What about guys like what about a guy like Jeff Tedford? Do you think that what he's already done at Fresno, you think he's going to stay there for a while, or is he a guy that, I mean, he's got the Pac-12 ties, so is he a guy that we're going to see in the next year or two get another bigger job opportunity?
You know, Tedford, what he did this year is incredible.
Yep.
They went 1-11 last year. Fresno goes 9-3 this year in the Mountain West title game tomorrow. Playing a Boise State team they beat last week. Tedford's age, I think ADs generally want to bring in a guy in their 40s.
Sure.
Tedford's in his 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And Tedford was hot for a while at Cal. At the end of his tenure there, though, it went south. But the guy knows what he's doing. But again, I don't know. Oregon State supposedly made an inquiry to Tedford. He said, no, I'm uninterested. But Oregon's a vastly better job than Oregon State. So that's an interesting name. And again, he does have Pac-12 experience, but I also think it would be somewhat difficult for Oregon to sell to its fans. Yeah, we're bringing in a guy who had a lot of success early at Cal, but sort of faded at the end. Don't worry about it. We're better than Cal. But no, I'm not sure Tedford would fit from a PR standpoint. From a coaching standpoint, again, the guy knows what he's doing, especially offensively. But I don't think Tedford would be high on Oregon's list.
Now, do you think Dave Doran, did you think that was a situation where that's actually going to also cause problems for Tennessee? Do you think Dave Doran didn't take that job because he's not sure that's really, who would have thought, but why would you turn down Tennessee? But do you think now, after what happened with Schiano, there's going to be some coaches that are going to be hesitant?
Yeah, I think there's what happened with Leach. He was their 7th choice, evidently. You read certain national writers that Leach had a great conversation with Curry. They were talking contracts, and then all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under John Curry. So they named Phil Fulmer the full-time AD, but that's I'm not sure clown show is a strong enough term to describe what's going on in Tennessee. I don't think there's any doubt that if they hire a sitting coach, they're going to have to pay him a couple extra $1 million than they would. I think the one guy they can still get in their price range is T. Martin, the USC offensive coordinator, who obviously is a UT alum. At the same time, if T. Martin did not have Tennessee ties, they would not even be discussing the idea that T. Martin could be Tennessee's coach. The only thing T. Martin has going for him is the fact that he's a Tennessee alum.
Yep.
You talk to people around the SC program, and they're like, yeah, T. Martin's a good assistant. He needs more seasoning before he's a head coach. And yes, you look at the numbers that the USC's offense put up this season, and they're impressive. Then you do a little bit deeper dive and realize, wow, they were wildly inconsistent at times. They would put up 330 one week and then 606 the next. So there's something missing there. Sam Darnold did not have a great season, though he's a great NFL prospect still. Ronald Jones was underutilized at times. I think it goes back to if T. Martin had gone to, say, Kentucky, or if T. Martin had gone to South Carolina, Tennessee would not even be considering him. But because he's an alum, that, I guess, trumps all.
Yeah, and they might have
the idea that T. Martin might be the Tennessee coach is a legitimate one.
Yeah.
Though I don't think anybody in the SEC would be scared to face T. Martin as a coach.
Now, why wouldn't they are they – I know I was having this conversation. It was about a few days ago, I was having a conversation with Brian Moss of TigersSportsReport.com for Memphis, and he didn't really think that Norvell would go to Tennessee because Tennessee wouldn't even think of a Memphis coach. It would be too beneath them to bring over a coach from Memphis. Would that still be the case?
I think it is, and I think Mike Norvell is a really fast-rising coach, young guy. He looks older than he really is. He's in his 30s. He's coached along the East Coast. He's coached in the Midwest. He's coaching in the Southeast now, and he's got Pac-12 experience. And I remember when he was hired at Memphis, the paper, I think it was one of the Phoenix papers, talked to Todd Graham about Mike Norvell leaving, and Graham said, yeah, this guy's really good. And two other Todd Graham proteges, so to speak, are Gus Malzahn and Chad Morris. And Todd Graham said Mike Norvell is more well-rounded than both those guys. He thinks about all facets of the game rather than focusing on offense. And given what Gus Malzahn has done, that's a pretty impressive statement. I think Norvell will be in play for the Arkansas job.
Okay.
He went to Central Arkansas. His wife's an Arkansas native.
Yep.
If Arkansas' number one choice by far is Gus Malzahn, because he again is an Arkansas guy, and they're willing to pony up the cash, and that's a booster group that has an inordinate amount of money. People forget that's the Walton family, and the Tyson Chicken folks are all Arkansas boosters. Plus, there's Jerry Jones, who could write a $10 million check like you and I go into our pocket and get out $1.
That's true. That's true.
Mike Norvell, I think, is a legitimate candidate at Arkansas, but yeah, for whatever reason, I think Tennessee does look at that and go, we're not hiring a coach from him. But we will hire an assistant from USC who has zero head coaching experience just because he's a UT alum.
Yeah, right. So where does this leave Todd Graham, by the way? I mean, come on. I mean, he's got to get I understand why sometimes it's time to go. But Todd Graham, you just talked about some of his under coaches. So that's what kind of a coach Todd Graham is. So he's had a couple bad years. Okay. Do you think he's going to end up at a good job?
I think Todd Graham should get a Group of 5 job this year. I think Todd Graham's past what he's done at Rice, and leaving quickly at Rice and Pitt bothers ADs.
Okay.
But I would argue that if you're Arizona State and you're getting rid of Todd Graham to hire Herm Edwards, that's mystifying. Mystifying. I mean, Herm Edwards, interesting guy, great public speaker, looking a great NFL coach, hasn't coached in college ball for 30 years. And you're running off Todd Graham who had a 7-5 season. Now, again, I think they agree. There's reasons to get rid of Todd Graham. I'm not sure there's reasons to get rid of Todd Graham to hire Herm Edwards.
Yeah.
You wonder if Todd Graham really wants to coach again next year. But I think he could get a Group of 5 job. I think there are ADs out there who, at a Group of 5 school, who realize we're not a destination job, we're a stepping stone job. So Todd Graham has proven he can win. I'll bring him in. And if he leaves in 3 or 4 years, so be it. At least we'll have a 3 or 4 year winning stretch. So I think Todd Graham, if he wants to coach, will be coaching again next fall. I just think it'll be at a Power 5 school.
All right. And by the way, one more. Now I'm going to get into these championship games. Scott Frost, is that like?
I think it's a given that he's going to Nebraska. I live in Orlando. I think UCF fans were thinking, hey, he's going to stay. And then they realized, no, he's not going to stay. We're going to finish unbeaten potentially and still finish outside the top 10 in the playoff rankings.
Yeah.
And yes, UCF has big-time potential if it ever gets into a Power 5 conference. It's the second largest school in the country in terms of enrollment, 60,000 plus. At the same time, they sold out one game this year. Nice on-campus stadium, seats 48,000. They sold out once. That was last week against USF.
Yeah.
And I think Frost looks around and says, this place has a ton of potential, but I ain't getting into the playoff. I can't sell out my home stadium, and I can go home and be sort of a conquering hero. And it's going to be a lot tougher, I think, for Frost to recruit his style of football at Nebraska. He's going to have to, get guys from Florida.
It's going to take some time.
Get guys from California to play his style. But I think he can be successful there, and I don't think there's any doubt but that Saturday's game against Memphis for the AAC title will be his final game at UCF.
Yeah, and because when I was talking about this with a couple of our guests, that including Mark Daniels, the voice of the Knights, a few weeks ago, this was I had mentioned because he kind of thought, I think he's going to stay, and I brought up, we got to believe that if the Nebraska, because at that time we weren't sure about the Nebraska job opening up about a month ago, we had the feeling that was possible. And I just made the comment, I can't imagine that if Nebraska job opens up, that Scott Frost wouldn't be the one place that he would go to and leave Central Florida for. I didn't buy in, to tell you the truth, of the Florida State stuff. I felt that, I could see him staying at Central Florida, only he would leave if it's Nebraska. And the Nebraska job opened up. It was too good. It's going to be too good for him to pass up.
Exactly. Plus, it's rare for a AD like Bill Mood at Nebraska, who basically has made no bones about it. Scott Frost, my guy. We want him. I'm going to go try to get him.
Yep.
Generally you ADs talk around the subject. Oh yeah, Scott Frost's doing a great job. There's other candidates, but no, basically it's obvious from what Moose has said that you sort of wonder if he was brought in with the direct orders. Hey, Bill, we're hiring you. Do what it takes to get Scott Frost home. And
Smart.
Scott Frost grew up in Wood River, Nebraska. Went to Stanford for 2 years, transferred home, played for Osborne, was the quarterback on Osborne's final team that shared a national title. He has a great affinity for Nebraska. Nebraska fans have a great affinity for Frost. And given what Nebraska fans have put up with, Mike Riley is a super nice guy. Did not get it done there.
No.
Bo Pelini, not a super nice guy, and was quasi-successful. Bill Callahan was a disaster. Frank Solich was mildly successful. They're craving relevance again.
Yes.
I think the hiring of Scott Frost brings them relevance.
Yep.
Assuming he can win. Now, he's not going to win 12 games right away, obviously. It's going to take a while. But I think that style of ball can win. You just got to get the players. But that's going to be the difficult aspect of this. But I don't think there's any doubt that Scott Frost will coach his final game at UCF tomorrow.
All right, we got about 10 minutes left with you, so let's quickly run through these championship games. Might as well start with that one. I think that's a danger spot for Central Florida now because you come off the South Florida emotional game and all that. 1 week later, you got to play a Memphis team that's sitting there chomping at the bit, revenge on their mind. They're playing great football. I just think this is going to be a tough spot for Central Florida. I don't know. I picked Central Florida to win the conference before the season began, but I'm kind of feeling like maybe I should be taking Memphis in this game.
Well, this is a rematch, and UCF blew them out first time, 40-13. Memphis scored on the first possession, went right down the field, and that was basically it. These are two extremely potent offenses. There are two teams nationally that have scored at least 60 points 3 times this year. And that's them, UCF and Memphis. And there's also, I think there's a undercurrent of worry at Memphis that Norvell could leave. The angst at UCF is Frost is going to leave.
Yeah.
And you wonder how that's going to affect the players. They all like Frost. What he has done at UCF, they were 0-12 in 2015. They could be 12-0 tomorrow by 3:30. So I think UCF's a better team. I think the mindset, the psyche of the UCF players is key. It will not be a blowout. Memphis will play better. Riley Ferguson is a really good quarterback. So is Mackenzie Milton. So this is a very intriguing quarterback matchup. I think the difference is UCF can count on Adrian Killens, the running back, and I'm not sure Memphis has a guy that can do the kind of stuff that Killens can do. I think UCF wins in a close game.
All right, yeah, I think definitely a close game, like Memphis, at least as a pretty good dog in that game. If not, maybe a surprise win. Anthony Miller's a heck of a receiver.
Yes.
And we're going to keep an eye on him in the NFL draft this year. Pac-12 game, which is coming up in just a few hours. And Stanford, I did some research here. David Shaw has won 9 of 13 games since 2012 when Stanford's a dog. So we just saw them beat Notre Dame. We just saw them beat Washington as a dog. They're in a revenge spot here against the Trojans. I tell you what, if USC plays the way they did against UCLA, I got no problem thinking Stanford's going to win. I like the way Costello's starting to play.
Yeah, and Bryce Love ran for 160, even though Stanford got hammered earlier. I think USC is a more talented team.
Sure.
Better balance. I think Sam Darnold is vastly better than Costello. I think Sam Darnold can make plays that Costello can only dream of making. But Bryce Love is a key factor. Shaw's a better coach than Clay Helton. I think USC's firepower, though, is such that they're going to win. But again, this is a game where it was not close the first time they played. It will be close this time, but I think USC gets the win.
All right, TCU and Oklahoma and the Sooners. I think they're about a 7.5 point favorite in this one. Just beat TCU a few weeks ago. Baker Mayfield's about to win the Heisman. I got no reason to think that Oklahoma is going to have a problem here with a few minutes left in this game. I think this game will be over by then.
Yeah, they scored 38 points when they played TCU before. They scored all 38 in the first half. and they didn't have to sweat in the second half when they played November 11th. That game was in Norman. Now I know the game's in Arlington. Oklahoma's going to have vastly more fans in the stands. And Baker Mayfield versus Kenny Hill, that's not even fair. But I think Gary Patterson, his defense will not be embarrassed like it was the first time. But you're right, I agree with you. I don't think there's any way TCU is going to shut down Mayfield. Mayfield will do enough to get Oklahoma to win. The irony here, obviously, is the Big 12 rather adds a conference title game, and if it wasn't for the title game, Oklahoma's in the playoffs.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of intrigue surrounding this. What happens if TCU wins? But I don't think TCU's going to win.
All right, SEC, that's the biggest game. Georgia trying to get revenge over Auburn. Tell you the truth, I was a little bit surprised to see this spread only at 2. Maybe up to 3 now, but after what Auburn did to Georgia a few weeks ago, I was kind of a little bit surprised about that. Not to say that Georgia shouldn't be respected, but I don't know. I mean, everything is just about Kerryon Johnson's health. I think everybody's waiting to find out if Kerryon Johnson's going to be healthy. And if he is, then you kind of feel good about Auburn. But if he's not, I don't know. I mean, Georgia's going to have to play much better defense, so I don't expect Georgia to all of a sudden turn it on offensively. If Georgia wins, they're going to have to win a low-scoring game.
Yes, they're a grinder team. They win with defense in the running game. And the last time they played, Auburn destroyed them along both lines of scrimmage. Auburn ran at will and held Georgia to 46 yards rushing.
Yep.
And when Georgia can't run, they can't win.
Yep.
Jake Fromm is nothing against Jake Fromm. He's a true freshman. He's an 18-year-old kid. He's a game manager.
Sure.
He's at his best when he can hand off to Stoney Michel, hand off to Nick Chubb, and use play action. He could not do that the first game. They sacked him 4 times. He completed 46% of his passes, which is a season low. So you're right, though. If Kerryon Johnson is not close to 100%, all of a sudden, where does Auburn's running game come from? They do not trust Asa Martin. And Stidham ran well last week. He ran for a career-high 51 yards, but that's because Alabama had to focus so heavily on Johnson.
Yep.
So his health is vital. But again, this is a game, you're right. Auburn, they won by 23 the first time. That was on November 11th. How much better can Georgia be in the ensuing? How much better have they become in the ensuing 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Johnson's health maybe brings Auburn back to them a little bit, but Georgia's got to play a heck of a lot better than it did the first game. Auburn, I think, overall is more talented. And unless Kerryon Johnson's not at least 85 or 90%, Auburn's winning. If he's less, it becomes a much more intriguing game. You're right. I think the spread is quite low, presumably because of Johnson's health. But again, Auburn won by 23 on November 11th. I think Auburn wins tomorrow unless Johnson is totally ineffective.
Miami and Clemson. Clemson's a big favorite, and they should be. Miami is going to have to find a way, just like Georgia. They're going to have to win this game on defense. They're going to have to force Bryant into mistakes. They can't make any mistakes. I don't know. I have a bad feeling here that this game could be ugly. I'm hoping it doesn't, just for the fact that I'm a fan. I want to see it, maybe Miami go down to another really close game, but I don't know. I'm not completely 100% sold that Clemson's going to win the national championship this year because I don't think they've got the offense to do it. But in this particular situation, I fear for Miami.
Yeah, Miami, the defense gets a lot of credit. They force a boatload of turnovers, but they also give up 365 yards a game. And that's not championship caliber football. If they don't force turnovers, they do not win. Mm-hmm. They lost another receiver.
Yep.
It's Mark Richt has done a great job.
Oh yeah.
It's not an overly talented team, top to bottom. I mean, starting 22 can hang with anybody. The depth factor. Travis Homer stepped up great at running back after they lost Mark Walton. Malik Rozier is not anything close to being an elite quarterback.
No.
Again, the defense, they give up 80 yards a game more than Clemson. If they don't force, I would say they need to force at least 3 turnovers and probably 4 to have a legitimate chance to win. Yeah. I don't think Miami's going to run effectively against that Clemson front 4. That means Malik Rozier's got to make some plays in the passing game. Again, that passing game is limited because of injuries.
Yep.
So I think Clemson does win. Rick has done some nice work this year. It's a big line. I still would be tempted to give the points because I don't think Miami's going to have much success running the ball. And if Rozier plays like he did last week, This is a rout.
Yeah, you see, I don't even know if I would pick Miami to win if they had Walton, Richards, and Herndon, and they don't have any of them.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a tough job. Okay, and finally, Ohio State and Wisconsin. And I really want to know your take, because I've been surprised that some of the people I've asked talked about this game this week have actually sided with Wisconsin, because I've sided with Wisconsin for about 3 weeks now that they were going to win this game. But I'm always a bit tentative, and when people in our industry that I ask these questions actually are picking Wisconsin. So who are you picking?
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor is a really good running back. And frankly, though, that's it for Wisconsin's offense. I do not trust Hornibrook. I don't trust any of those receivers. Now, the Wisconsin defense leads the nation total defense. You look at them individually, not overwhelming. Collectively, they play extremely well. Jim Leonard's done a phenomenal job as a coordinator. That's a tight unit, aggressive unit, a physical unit, as Wisconsin always is. But again, if Taylor does not get his yards, I don't know how Wisconsin moves the ball. All that said, J.T. Barrett had arthroscopic surgery last Sunday.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I've had 4 arthroscopies. Obviously, I'm not an athlete.
Sure.
And I'm walking 2 or 3 days later. I cannot fathom how J.T. Barrett is going to be 100%, given that he had arthroscopic knee surgery. Yep. So, and the one thing, you look at Ohio State's defense, boy, that's a pretty good unit, except for the Iowa game. And Iowa took them to the woodshed, beat them in the woodshed, burned down the woodshed, and then poured dirt on top of the smoldering mess.
Yep.
Iowa ran all over Ohio State. The next week, Iowa coincidentally played Wisconsin. They ran for 25 yards on 26 carries against Wisconsin.
Yeah.
This Ohio State team is more athletic, more talented, but sometimes you watch Ohio State play, and they don't seem to quite understand how good they are. And I think play calling, I don't know if Kevin Wilson is totally on the same page every week with J.T. Barrett. You look at Weber, you look at Dobbins, wow, they got some interesting weapons. They don't always seem to mesh, though. With Ohio State, if J.T. Barrett was 100% healthy, I'd have no qualms at all about picking Ohio State. He ain't 100% healthy. I think Wisconsin is going to use the no one expects you guys to win, even though you're 12-0, kind of thing as a chip. So I think the selection committee certainly is hoping Wisconsin wins, and they're hoping Oklahoma wins, because if either of those teams win, are you going to put Alabama in the playoff, even though Alabama really doesn't have a great win? Yes, Alabama's talented, but so early in the week I thought Ohio State was going to win, but now I think Wisconsin is going to win. Even though Taylor's their whole offense, I think he'll do enough. And again, I'm not convinced that J.T. Barrett is going to be anything close to 100% because of that knee surgery.
Mike, great job. We hope that you can come back sometime in the next couple of weeks before all the craziness of the bowls and, of course, the playoffs start, so we can get your read on what you think is going to happen the rest of the way.
No problem. I've enjoyed myself. Hopefully imparted some info that's interesting. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thank you very much, Mike. Terrific. Take care. All right, so that's it's great to get. I think Mike's been one of the very few national writers that we've had an opportunity to have on, just a national writer, and that's why it was important for us to get him on. Matter of fact, we're going to be, and again, I'm going to invite him back as early as next week or the week after, see if we can get his take, because there's so many other things I could have sat there. I could have talked to Mike for another half hour. About a whole, I had more bowl games to go over and coaching positions and all that, but Mitch Light is going to join us, by the way, from Athlon on Monday. He'll be our national writer to go over the weekend and the championship scenarios, the big bowl games and all that. So we will get a national perspective on Monday's show at 2:00. And also, we've got Chris Dufresne from the Media Guides joining us on the 15th, which is the day before the bowl season begins, another national writer. So we will have some other national writers on, but that's okay. I mean, the more analysis that I can get from these really good national writers that have been around for a very long time and really know what they're talking about, like Mike, the better. So hopefully we'll get Mike on. again in the next week or two and get his take on everything that took place this past weekend. Because, again, as I mentioned, there's other bowl games that we did not talk about yet, and we will. The Conference USA, the MAC, not bowl games, championship games. Conference USA, the MAC, and the Mountain West. I did touch up on the Mountain West already for about a second. The Conference USA, you've got North Texas and FAU. And that's a game, by the way, that we did talk earlier in the week. We had a show on, I think it was, Tuesday, I believe. And we had on a couple of guests. We had on Chuck King from FAU Owl Access, and also Brett Vito from the Denton Record Chronicle to help to preview that game. So that's available on demand. FAU's I think they're about an 11-point favorite. And this was another question that I would have liked to have asked Mike about Lane Kiffin. So FAU had beaten North Texas 69-31 in late October. They actually led the game 69-17. So North Texas, obviously revenge on their minds, but I don't know. Revenge, okay, it matters, but what about matchups? That's a big, big loss. FAU had over 800 yards of total offense in that game. But North Texas has won 8 out of 9, the only loss to FAU. FAU's won 8 straight. It's a big spread. It's at FAU. It's a home game for the Owls. But I don't know. I'm thinking North Texas is not a bad idea. I don't think that game is going to be an ugly game anywhere near the 69-17 game. Maybe I'm wrong. Kiffin's a heck of a coach, but so is Seth Luttrell. And so now the only thing with North Texas is keep in mind that they are dealing with some injuries, especially to their top running back, Jeffrey Wilson. So that could be a big blow to them. So that's something that you want to keep an eye on. But still, it's a lot of points. I think, you know what? I know it's only North Texas, but I get the feeling that we are going to find out just how good FAU is. Because if FAU romps in that game, some people might go, oh, yeah, okay, they romp, big deal, it's North Texas. But I actually think if they romp in that game, that's really going to it's a really good coaching job by Kiffin to have that program dialed in. I mean, we're talking FAU, all right? We're not Western Kentucky had their run, and it wouldn't have been surprised if we were talking about Western Kentucky or even Louisiana Tech in this situation, or Southern Miss. But FAU, okay? So FAU winning 69-31. FAU, say, blowing them out again, that'd be a little bit impressive to me, but we'll see. In the MAC championship game, Toledo is a 21-point favorite. That's a big number, but that's because Toledo was the overwhelming favorite of the MAC. And so I guess we can kind of understand that. They've won 7 out of 8. Nobody expected Akron and Terry Bowden to be there. They had the surprise upset win over Ohio a couple of weeks ago. Then they beat Kent State last week to win the division. And both of these programs, by the way, have not won a conference championship, I believe, in over 10 years. So that's good. It's good for the MAC, fresh blood. But many people would expect Toledo to win the game. 21, though, that's a little bit too much for me. I think Akron is going to hang in there. Now, maybe if they cover the spread, it'll be because Toledo scores maybe a couple of scores late and opens up the game. Okay, I can see that happening. But I don't think Akron gets blown away here. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if Toledo goes up 35-7 at halftime. I'll 21 points in a championship game. Lack of respect. Bowden's a good coach, so I'm going to say 21. I'm willing to take that many points. Look, Logan Woodside's a good quarterback. He's very efficient. Does not turn the ball over. So if somehow Akron can find a way to get the ball, a couple of turnovers in the game somehow, and Bowden maybe a couple of trick plays. The Bowden family. They can come up with some trick plays. By the way, Toledo beat Akron by 24 points back on October 21st, and Woodside had a big game with 5 touchdown passes. So that was the story in the MAC championship game. And what else? And then in the I think we've covered all of them. Again, the Mountain West, by the way, Boise's an 8.5-point favorite, and I definitely like Fresno in that one. not because they beat Boise last week and they're getting 9 this week, even though that the site is reversed. It's in Boise for the championship game. But just because, again, as we mentioned before, Tedford has done a tremendous job. We feel pretty good about what's going on at Fresno. We talked about Fresno, about 4 or 5 weeks ago on the meeting room. So we understood what was happening way back then. And lo and behold, they've gone on to win the division and they're in the championship game. A lot of it really look, besides Tedford, Marcus McMarion has done a tremendous job taking over a quarterback, the late transfer. And Keyshawn Johnson has done a great job. The other Keyshawn Johnson, a wide receiver. So that's a lot of points for me. Definitely like the points. No question about that. I'm going to be very surprised if Boise wins. If they cover that game, to me, it's going to be because, I don't know, some sort of a late kind of, score. But I don't see Boise State winning that game easy. I'm sorry. I just don't. Matter of fact, I think Fresno can win that game. Matter of fact, if you're looking at straight up dogs, and you're going to get you're going to get some dogs. I'm not talking about the Georgia Bulldogs or their 2 or 3 point dog spread. But out of the really big dogs that are out there, Wisconsin's the obvious one. All right, so that's the obvious one. Stanford, okay, yes, I like Stanford. What kind of a big dog are they? Not much. I mean, it's about a 4 point spread. That's not a big dog either. So, I mean, the big dogs, like the touchdown or more dogs, you're talking Oklahoma. You're talking TCU as a dog, Memphis is a dog, the Badgers is a dog, the Bulldogs of Fresno State is a dog, Miami is a dog, and Akron is a dog. So out of those, that's right, and North Texas. Out of those, I would go with Fresno State, or I am going to go with Fresno State. And I would go with, you know what? Well, I'm going with Wisconsin. You know that. So if I was just going with 2, those would be my 2. All right, I'd go with Fresno State and Wisconsin. But I'm also I'm thinking about rolling the dice with Memphis because I really think that game is a flip of the coin game. I think the emotion that took place the week before with Memphis is something. I mean, with Central Florida and the game against South Florida, I just think that's just way too much for. I think it's just way too much for Central Florida to overcome and be able to play the way that they'd want to play because they played the most emotional, exciting game that you can think of. And I'm sorry, but I do not now, unless you're a program that plays a lot of big games. You got a group of kids that have been around a lot of big games for years. You're expected to play in big games. You know what to expect after you play the big game. That's not the case with Central Florida. Okay, it's a nice season for them. They're again my preseason pick to win it. I'm not saying that this is one of those situations where I'm not saying that I'm picking Memphis to upset them because I think outright that's it. That's my pick. They're winning. I'm just going to go ahead and pick them just because I think it's a wise play. That's all. Based on this circumstance, I can't foreshadow when I'm picking Central Florida to win the conference championship in the beginning of the season that they're going to have that kind of a tough test that game before. Now, look, what could happen is they get into this situation. Maybe they take a little while to kind of get it going. They're down a couple scores, go into halftime, regroup, come out, a little bit more intensity, and all of a sudden they have a great second half, overtake Memphis, win the game. I could see that happening. They're the better team. Okay, let's just put it that way. But under those circumstances, having to beat them for the second time this season, I think Memphis is a pretty good dog play. I don't think North Texas is a smart dog play. Not the worst idea in the world, but I think FAU is just too strong for them. But I'm going to go with Clemson. I'm going to go with Auburn. I'm going to go with, and I told you the others. I'm going to go with Oklahoma. Those are the favorites. And then I gave you the rest. Okay, now the other games, Florida State, the whole situation with Jimbo Fisher. So we know what's going on there. So Jimbo Fisher is gone. Now I'm sure, can beat Louisiana Monroe without him. So if they beat Louisiana Monroe, Florida State would go bowling. Not sure what kind of a fun situation it is right now in Tallahassee, though. But it's Florida State, and if they do get Taggart, I'm sure they're going to be pretty psyched up about that anyway. And FIU I'm pretty sure FIU is heading to a bowl. They have 7 wins. So now I don't know, if all of a sudden, now last season, I think there was like 3 or 4 teams, I think there were, that were not bowl eligible. So there was like several teams that had 5 wins and they had to go to bowl games. I don't think that's the situation this season. But I do know now FIU is not in the Sun Belt, so that helps. Because sometimes you can have 6, 7 wins in the Sun Belt, and they'll take teams with 5 wins in other conferences. So, but FIU, being that they are in the Conference USA, should be fine with 7 wins. But hey, go ahead and get the 8 anyway. And I don't know. I mean, this is a game that could be tough. Remember, we took UMass a few weeks ago because they've actually had a nice season. They've won 4-5. The one loss in those 5, they lost by just 11 points at Mississippi State. So this has been a good season for UMass. They've beaten FIU in the last 2 years they've played them. The only 2 years they've played them. So, okay, maybe I take UMass. It's possible. FIU, by the way, has lost 2 out of the last 3 games. So, and then speaking of the Sun Belt, you have Georgia Southern at Coastal Carolina. Nobody cares about that game. But interesting enough to point this out, Georgia Southern started the season 0-9, and now they've won their last 2. They started the season 0-5-1 against the spread, and now they're 4-1 in their last 5 against the spread. Coastal Carolina, though, started the season 1-9, and then they beat Idaho 2 weeks ago to snap their 9-game losing streak. So there you go. Idaho and Georgia State. Georgia State's got 6 wins, but as I said, it's a Sun Belt, so you don't know how that's going to work out for them. But they've won 6 out of 8, so I expect them to win. I would definitely take Georgia State to cover that game. Idaho, Linehan may not even play again. They've lost 6 out of 7. So yeah, I think Georgia State's a really good play there. It's just a 6-point favorite at home against Idaho. Appalachian State's a 15-point favorite against Lafayette. If Lafayette wins, they're bowl eligible. I don't know if that'll be good enough to get them to a bowl. By the way, interesting enough, every time Lafayette has lost this year, they have not covered the spread. Every time they have won this year, they have covered the spread. So I guess if you go by that trend, then if you think Appalachian State's going to beat them, which they probably will, then I guess you want to take Appalachian State. Appalachian State got 7 wins, and they are trying to win the Sun Belt, of course. It does not have a championship game, as far as I know. Troy is at Arkansas State. Now, this is the big one in the Sun Belt. Troy's got 9 wins. Arkansas State has 7. Arkansas State's won 6 out of the last 7. Troy's won 5 straight. So the winner of this game is looking pretty good to win the Sun Belt. It's a pick'em game as well. It should be. Arkansas State, the Wolves, have beaten Troy 4 straight times. So I don't know. This is a real tough one to call. I'm not sure I'm even going to touch that one. That's on Saturday night. And how about this one? South Alabama at New Mexico State. South Alabama beat New Mexico State in the first meeting last year. They're coming off a 52-0 loss at Georgia Southern. That was Georgia Southern's first win of the season. And New Mexico State's a 9-point favorite in this game. If New Mexico State wins the game, now again, I'm pretty sure they're going to go to a bowl. Most teams do when they're bowl eligible. New Mexico State has not been to a bowl since 1960. So if New Mexico State wins this game, and I'm taking the win and cover the 9, then they better go to a bowl. I'd be pretty upset if they don't. So that is what is going on in college football, besides what you've already heard on the program today. All right. So anyway, sorry we could not hook up. Apparently with Brian Matthews. He's probably been tied up. A lot going on before the game tomorrow. If we get an opportunity to touch base with him a little bit later on, maybe we'll throw him on the meeting room. I know we're going to get an opportunity to talk to Ben Wargle real soon. So what we'll probably just do is switch that over to the OFN meeting room. do a little bit of a one-on-one with Ben in a few minutes. So we will have Ben on. That'll be available on demand a little bit later on, as well as this show. We want to thank Carlos Mendez, Ryan Aber for joining us, Mike Yuganin for joining us as well. And boy, it's been a great week here, and it's not over yet. Again, we still have Ben Wargel, and again, not sure if we're going to be able to get Brian Matthews on a little bit later on, but we will try. But anyway, it's been a great week so far. We will see you, as I mentioned before, in case you do not get an opportunity to tune in to the interview I'm going to do with Ben in about 15 minutes. But Mitch Light from Athlon is going to join me on Monday to recap the weekend in college football. That's at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. Chris Dufresne's going to join us from the Media Guides in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, I'll see if I can get Mike back in the next week or two as well. And who knows who else is going to join us in the next couple of weeks before the bowl season begins. And be rest assured, we'll have wall-to-wall bowl coverage, bowl reports, bowl interviews, and all sorts of scouting reports as well, as we want you to keep an eye on the key players in all these bowl games and playoff games that will be entering the NFL draft in 2018. Thanks to everybody for participating on the show. Thanks for tuning in here on Ourlads Football Radio Network for OFN College Football Fridays, and we'll see you again next time.